nonprofit advocacy and technology since about 2014. What else can I say? Some of the organizations that I've worked with and helped to kind of guide and advise on mobile messaging, SMS strategy. I've listed AFSCME, Alliance for Climate Education, United Auto Workers, and many, many more. So if you'd like to catch me on Twitter, I've included my Twitter handle. And you can also see my 2 rescue dogs that my husband and I have at home here in Queens. So that is a little bit about myself and the agenda that we have for today. I'll be giving a quick overview of Twilio. We'll move through some SMS specific terminology together. We'll do a dive into shortcodes. I'd like to cover a little bit about multi-language SMS campaigns. That's primarily for organizations that might be considering bilingual outreach. If you might be interested in sending messages out in English and Spanish, for example, or there are different combinations of multi-language campaigns out there in the universe. Emojis, SMS deliverability. We have toll-free messaging and some nuances related to that. And hopefully at the very tail end, we'll have some SMS compliance best practices. All right. And so we'll do a quick poll if you want to just drop into chat. Question number 1, thinking about the SMS and text messaging landscape, which topic might sound more interesting for you? You can just put A, shortcodes, B, toll-free, text messaging, C, compliance, or D, something else. If you do think that it is something else that you're interested in, I would be very curious to know what that something else is. So we can take just a moment and see about getting some responses in the chat. And we're getting some, and we want just to call out, so we won't be covering 10DLC or what some of you might know as A2P 10DLC today, just because that's outside of the scope of our agenda. But for those of you who are curious, I'm certainly happy to share some links to 10DLC related articles. That's a little bit outside of the scope of Action Network's agenda for today. So a lot of C's, compliance, lots of compliance, not surprised. Not really a surprise there. And then for number 2, is your team already managing SMS campaigns or are you planning to launch soon? So again, I think that different folks are at different stages and would just love to hear some feedback on that. Right, looking for ways to engage membership effectively and awesome. So great. Moving forward, what is Twilio? So Twilio is a communication platform as a service company or a CPaaS company. We're a global digital communications company with offices around the world. And I've included ZipWhip here. ZipWhip is actually the primary provider of toll-free numbers, which can be enabled for voice calling and also can be enabled for toll-free text messaging. So Twilio, we acquired ZipWhip. That was one of our recent acquisitions, which has really positioned Twilio nicely to help streamline and optimize toll-free number procurement. We help a lot of Action Network's customers get set up for toll-free text messaging, and that's a really exciting space. So we'll talk a little bit more about toll-free in a while. Some of you may be familiar with Twilio's SendGrid. We acquired SendGrid a number of years ago, and that's our email enterprise solutions. We do offer email as well. And Twilio.org, in case any of you are interested, Twilio.org is our social impact side of Twilio's business. So all of that is a little bit of the universe of Twilio. Mobile messaging, SMS, it can be a little overwhelming just because there's a lot of jargon. There are a lot of acronyms, abbreviations. What the heck does any of this mean? So in an attempt to demystify some of this universe, we'll go through and break apart and kind of look closely at some of these terms to help you all get a little bit of a better understanding if some of you are new. And we may have some experts on today, so hopefully we'll have a little something for everyone. Right, so when we look at some of the definitions, I think that this distinction of P2P versus A2P, according to carriers and carrier guidelines, when we're talking about carriers, we're largely looking at Verizon, AT&T, and T-Mobile. So carriers and the CTIA, which is the Wireless Carrier Association in the United States, they've actually defined all SMS traffic that's running through Twilio as A2P, or application to person. And that's important just mainly for compliance reasons. I wanted to call this out for those of you who are interested in compliance, because all A2P SMS traffic requires proof of end user opt-in. And we really celebrate our partnership with Action Network because I know that Action Network has architected their mobile messaging offerings in a way that's very mindful of compliance, and actually one of the best practice examples that we like to highlight and celebrate, as far as making sure that there is always an action from the end user, signing up through a web page, explicitly opting in to receive text messages, which is a great way to boost engagement as well. So, and this slide deck, by the way, I'm happy to share this out, and then Action Network, our friends, can, I think, disseminate the slide deck for those of you who want to go back and review some of the information that's contained here. So just to make sure that you don't try to take furious notes throughout the whole time here. Moving into the segment of our talk about shortcodes. So I'll break down some considerations. Some of you may be familiar with shortcodes, some of you may be, quite new to some of this language. We have some examples of what shortcodes look like here in the screenshots. 741, right? And usually when you see web-based calls to action advertised across different organizations' websites, 741 may be a great example of a vanity shortcode. So a vanity shortcode, do I want a random shortcode, which is a random combination of digits, or do I want a vanity shortcode that might be easier to remember and a little bit more memorable? I think if I remember correctly, 7-Eleven has their shortcode as 711711. So if you want to have the ability to customize and control which digits are appearing in your shortcode, that is a little bit higher cost. Of course, there's a little bit of a larger price tag associated with a vanity shortcode. If you want to go for the more budget-friendly option, then usually you'll go with a random shortcode, which is that random combination of digits. Shared shortcode versus dedicated shortcode. This is sort of a trick question. Related back down to the last point in the list we have, I heard carriers are going to ban shared shortcodes. What does that actually mean? So historically, going back to when I worked with Mobile Commons was between 2015 to 2017, there was a large number of organizations that were signing on to launch mobile messaging programs through shared shortcodes. What a shared shortcode means is that you would have one single shortcode that's being shared perhaps by 20 or 30 different nonprofit organizations. And the way that the messaging traffic was separated out was according to keyword, right? So like one organization would have its own set of unique keywords, and that would separate out some of the messaging into a unique stream. Shared shortcodes, however, have a lot of compliance issues. Right? Because if you think of one shortcode that's being shared by 30 different organizations, it only takes one bad actor organization that starts to try and send out spam text messages to folks over that shared shortcode. And that bad actor spam type activity can get the entire shortcode shut down by carriers. So the one thing to really think about when you're thinking about shortcodes is shortcodes have very strict compliance requirements. Carriers often will monitor the traffic that's going over shortcodes because they want to track and make sure that spam activity is not happening. Carriers don't want spam going over the networks. Like now we're in 2022, there's an increasing, a very sharp focus with carriers in the general mobile messaging ecosystem and Twilio is very much in line with this idea as well. We want to reduce the amount of unwanted messaging in the ecosystem. So we want to make sure that messages that are wanted, that people have opted into, that those messages can actually be delivered. And we want to make sure that spam is actually blocked from going out in the ecosystem, right, in the messaging universe. So the question again, shared shortcode versus dedicated shortcode, carriers are deprecating shared shortcodes. It is now not possible to get set up and running on a shared shortcode. The only option that's available to organizations, if you're looking to launch a brand new messaging program moving forward, you will be on a dedicated shortcode, or if the dedicated shortcode, maybe you have budget considerations, you're looking for something that's a little more cost friendly. Instead of a dedicated shortcode, you can look at toll-free text messaging, which is something that's a little price friendlier. And then we'll get into that, as I said, a little bit later on. Moving forward. So some of the benefits, right, and some of the minuses, because obviously you have to look at the full picture. You'll notice that I'm a big dog person and I'm a dog mom, so I tend to sprinkle in some dog photos throughout some of my presentations. When you look at the throughput. So what throughput means, this is a very common mobile messaging term. Throughput is how quickly you can send, the largest possible volume of messaging out without getting your messages caught up in a queue. So we don't have unlimited throughput. Usually we talk about throughput in terms of MPS, which is message segments per second. Shortcodes generally have a very high throughput, and we have some flexibility to increase, to actually ratchet up the throughput on shortcodes. So if you're looking at sending, let's say, hundreds of thousands of messages outbound in a short amount of time, you want to have probably 100 messages per second, or sorry, message segments per second, or you might even want to go higher than that. Shortcode is probably going to be your best bet. When we look at concerns around carrier filtering, so carriers, as I said, are trying to monitor the traffic that goes out when we're looking at the text messaging ecosystem. Carriers are looking to make sure that they can prevent spam type activity. They're also monitoring because, as for those of you who are interested, we have Twilio's messaging policy. We've designed Twilio's messaging policy to be in alignment with carrier guidelines, with CTIA expectations. So when you have, for example, and this is a little bit jumping ahead into our compliance section, but marijuana and cannabis content is not allowed on mobile messaging programs at all. And that's according to carrier restrictions. So marijuana and cannabis falls into a category called prohibited content. And so if carriers are picking up anything that looks like it has marijuana or cannabis terminology in the message, they're going to go ahead and filter that traffic, and they will block those messages. Those messages are not going to get delivered to the end user handset. And your goal, if you want to boost member engagement, many of us who are with nonprofit or advocacy or political organizations, you want to make sure that your messages are getting delivered, and you want to maximize the engagement, right? That's the outcome that you're looking for. So you want to avoid carrier filtering. We'll get into that a little bit more towards the end with our compliance discussion. But if you go through, because the process of applying for a shortcode requires a lot of additional detailed information upfront, as I've called out in one of the bullet points here, the shortcode is going to be a little more expensive. And then your application process and the vetting process to get approved for your shortcode program is going to take a longer time. It can take around 8 to 12 weeks for the full end-to-end process if you're standing up a brand new shortcode program from scratch. So just do want to be mindful about the additional time that it's going to take for you to get up and running on a shortcode. When we talk about the being more memorable, we talked a little bit about vanity shortcodes. Shortcodes are less digits, right? It's actually shorter than a long phone number. So for this reason, if you do have additional budget, shortcode could be a great option for you. We talked enough about the strict requirements for providing proof of how are you collecting your end user opt-in. You will not get approved for a shortcode messaging unless you can present documentation about what does your web opt-in look like. Are your terms and conditions all in order? What does your SMS privacy policy look like? Does it contain all of the elements that carriers are looking for? So Twilio and Action Network partner together, and we really do look for ways to streamline and optimize this process to make sure that shortcode messaging programs are compliant and that those can get up and running as quickly as possible within the constraints I mentioned earlier. So perfect. When we look at segments, right? Because I was talking about throughput, and we talked about how quickly it's possible to send out a large number of messages in a short amount of time. So text message has character limitations. Some of you may be familiar with this. Generally, we hear and see a lot of details about a text message can contain up to 160 characters before it starts getting broken apart into segments. Here is in the screenshot an example of a long message that's been broken apart into multiple segments. That's where you see 1 of 2 and 2 of 2. That's just to keep in mind because, again, when you're thinking about costs, you want to think about how many messages you're sending out per month. But if you're sending out a long message, you have the chance that your message is going to get broken apart into 2 segments. Some very long messages may get broken apart into 3 segments. That can have cost implications. Again, with the carrier networks, the way that messages are delivered when they're broken up into more than 1 segment like this is lucky that we have 1 of 2 at the top and then 2 of 2 at the bottom. Occasionally for the user experience, those messages may get flipped. So it can be a little bit confusing for someone to receive a message where the second part of the message is the first thing that they see. And that's, again, something for you to think about when you're thinking about what content you want to include in your outbound messages. Sometimes we have organizations that will look for ways to keep their messages short and snappy and actionable, instead of going the route of thinking about how long can my message possibly be. If you need to include emojis or Spanish special characters in your message, that is supported by Twilio, but that's going to have some impact on the segmentation, as we just mentioned. In an English-only message, you'll probably have that up to 160 characters before your message starts getting broken apart. If you add in Spanish special characters like NEA, for example, that's automatically going to reduce the number of available characters that you have in your message, and it's going to start breaking up your message more quickly. We'll look at some examples of some multi-language mobile outreach in just a minute. What am I saying here? Feature phones are not able to, certain feature phones, right? What is a feature phone? Is a non-smartphone. These do exist in the landscape. Again, we look at low-income communities, right? Some folks in low-income areas or rural areas may have smartphones, but not everybody has a smartphone. So just again, thinking in terms of the end user experience, if you are dealing with people who have feature phones or older non-smartphones, those may not be able to receive MMS messages. MMS messages can be a picture message, an MMS could be a video, an MMS could also be a GIF or a GIF, whatever your preferred pronunciation. So just thinking about before, a lot of people like to think in terms of bells and whistles and how you can include all of those very exciting, fancy, sophisticated things in your mobile messaging. And sometimes it's actually nice to think about how you can simplify to make sure that your messages can be received and read and easily understood and acted upon by end users that you're trying to engage with. I always encourage sending test messages out. So if you have your team, employees at your organization, interns, you can send a test message out to, let's say, a group of 3 or 4 or 5 internal staff members first, check and make sure the message looks okay, that it's coming through without any issues. And then once you've run a successful test, then you can send out to your larger list of opt-ins, whether that's, let's say, 2,000 recipients or whether it's 200,000 recipients, but always try and test first. And then again, if your organization would like to use SMS to drive fundraising, because this is a common use case, I would say, and one that we do see with a lot of Action Network partners, do use a branded URL or a branded link that you can include in the outbound text message to redirect your end users to an online donation page. I can't stress this enough, but do not use bit.ly links in your outbound text messages. Do not use anything that looks like a free public link shortener. That's why I specifically said a branded URL. You can also use a branded short URL, but make sure that you do have that branding for your URL. Ideally, that's going to correspond directly with the name of your organization. That is because carriers are, again, looking for content. They're looking for content violations of messages that are going across in the mobile messaging ecosystem. Again, if you're running a donation text messaging program on a shortcode, then it is very, very important to indicate on your shortcode program application that you are going to have fundraising or political donations as one of your use cases. And that way you can get that fundraising donation use case approved upfront before you launch your messaging program. That's going to avoid any problems down the way. I'll just pause for a moment and check in chat and see if we might have any questions. I know that we've been through quite a lot already. So let me just take a quick peek. All right. And good to know that friends at Action Network are also dog friendly. Great. We do have one question. I think I missed this. What is a shortcode? So I'll give a very nice, straightforward example, which is something that I mentioned earlier for those of you who joined late. 7-Eleven, which we hopefully may know and have experience with. I believe 7-Eleven has their own shortcode text messaging program. A shortcode is a short number, which is actually, you can see it here in this example screenshot. rather than a long 10-digit number, which is what we're all used to when you send text messages to your friends or family. A short code is a short number, like what you can see with 7-Eleven's retail marketing program. Their short code is 711711. You can sign up through 7-Eleven's website. You can sign up through 7-Eleven's mobile app, and you can opt in to receive coupons and discounts and deals that you'll receive those text messages from the 711711 number. This here we can see is 88709. This would be a dedicated short code that corresponds with, let's say, a nonprofit organization or even a government agency. Like I used to work with New York City Department of Health, and I helped to expand and build out their mobile messaging program by advising some of their staff. The New York City Department of Health had their own special, unique short code as well for the messages that they would send out to residents in New York City. They had a quit smoking text messaging program, a program for new mothers to send relevant text message outreach there to different demographics. So hopefully that clears up what is a short code. And we'll pause again shortly for another batch of questions, but I'll move forward just so that we can get through a lot of this content. When we look here, I've just included a screenshot and also the website address for what we offer through Twilio, the messaging segment calculator. So I gave some examples just a few minutes ago. If you are involved in, let's say, Spanish and English bilingual text messaging, when you do introduce some Spanish special characters, and not only for Spanish, this is actually common. If you're doing mobile outreach in other languages that have non-standard characters, Chinese is one example, Arabic is another example, Russian is another example. Those non-standard characters are going to impact the number of available characters that you have for your outbound text message. I think that it was the New York City Department of Education. They actually had quite an extensive multi-language text messaging program, just because we have here in New York City so many different families from so many different backgrounds, linguistic backgrounds. So they had a requirement to understand, like, we need to send Arabic text messages or Chinese text messages. How can we make sure to make those messages fit within the constraints of the character limitations? So this is one tool that can give you an estimate. If you input the message you're trying to send out, it will process and tell you how many segments that message is going to be broken into. So this can be very helpful for your planning process. Spanish example. I think that this is a great example, also a nice example of what I was mentioning a moment ago with MMS messaging. So when we're talking about SMS, that's referring to something that's pure text, just basic, what you can see here. When you have an MMS message, that is, and it's actually a great way to test and boost engagement rates. For example, if you're running a fundraising and donation campaign program, you can try to send, like, an A/B testing kind of concept. You can try to send a message out that is simply text with a link to a donation page to one group of people. And then alternatively, you can send the identical text message with an image or a graphic. And it's interesting to look at those results to see how the introduction of an image or a GIF can sometimes boost engagement rates. If you're trying to send text messages out to get volunteers to sign up for an upcoming volunteer event, to direct people to sign an online petition, for example, to encourage people to come to a rally that's on the upcoming weekend, MMS and introducing some of these non-text media formats is a really interesting, nice way to look at what does and doesn't boost engagement rates and response rates. Right, and then so moving on, what else do we have? Here's an example of a Spanish language web-based opt-in. So again, if you are running a, let's say, bilingual English and Spanish messaging campaign, you want to make sure that you offer an English language web-based opt-in, and then for your Spanish language users, you can direct them to a Spanish language opt-in opportunity. And so that is just good to keep in mind as you're moving forward into the mobile messaging universe. Right, here we have a couple of examples. This isn't a direct endorsement of any of the organizations, but I thought that these are some nice examples to look at how different organizations are moving forward with their outreach and engagement efforts. Here we have, of course, an example of a short code, 55156. This, I think, is a great example of best practice. So if we want to dissect the message that we're looking here, we can see some really great elements. One is personalization. So hi, it's Arisha with COC Pack. When you say the name, when you include a personalized name of someone who's going to be the voice of your organization, that's actually much better and can tend to boost engagement rates. If I say like, hi, I'm Jeri from Greenpeace, I'm reaching out to ask you to take XYZ action. So we call this part of the message is referred to as sender identification. Carriers are always looking to make sure that you have proper sender identification included in your messages. And if you do, if you're mindful about this, then you can reduce your instances of carrier filtering and you can avoid your messages from being blocked, right? So you want to make sure that you're always identifying, ideally, best practice, the name of who the person is. If you don't want to share the name of an actual employee of your organization, you can use a fictional name, right? You can just create a name and invent a name of a person. The important part is that you name the organization, because someone who is receiving this message will identify with, oh yeah, I remember that I signed up and I opted in to receive messages from World Wildlife Fund, right? Or they should have some ability to recognize which organization is sending the messages. If they don't know who the message is coming from, that's going to increase the likelihood that someone is going to reply stop to opt out of receiving your messages. And you want to think about how you can minimize that opt-out rate, because you only can continue engaging with people through text messaging if you keep them opted into your program, right? And so the rest of what I wanted to call out for this first message is the stop to quit piece, which is at the end of this first message. You always want to give people an option, as even though I said you want to minimize the number of opt-outs, this is like a friendly option. At any point, people should be able to unsubscribe from your text messages, from your organization's text messages, and they should, it's like having an email unsubscribe option in the footer of a marketing email or in the footer of a donation email. By giving people that option to opt out, the people who stay opted in, you know that those are people that absolutely want to hear from your organization, and that those are people who are eager and excited to find out more ways to engage with your organization. And if it's your members, they're looking for more. So that you kind of curate your list of opt-ins to make sure that you have a very high quality of the people that have opted in and that remain opted in over time. Great, so moving forward. Additional questions before we move into toll-free. Feel free to drop your questions in the chat. I'll just take a quick look. We do have one. How can you get rid of hackers on your mobile and data systems? I would love to hear a little bit more detail about, like, if you're referring to a specific example, or I don't know if that our friends in Action Network wanted to take a stab at answering that question. Generally, when we're looking at text messaging and mobile messaging outreach, as I said, if you are carefully gathering your list of opt-ins, then you should be making sure that you're only sending text messages out to people who are connected with your organization. They are your supporters, they are your prospective donors. But this does bring up a great point. Sometimes we have bad actors who will sign up on a web page to opt into a text messaging program with the goal of sending some kind of malicious text messages back over to your organization. We have had, I know of a number of instances where this has happened, where you have end users will start sending some kind of obscenities or some kind of offensive language that they will send in their replies to the text messages that you're sending out to your subscription list for your opted-in subscribers. We do have solutions that we can block anyone who is being offensive or abusive. If you have a specific phone number And we also work with our partners at Action Network to make sure that, if you are part of a labor union, if you are part of a nonprofit organization, obviously you want to make sure that anyone who is being abusive or offensive like that, that you can block them so that they no longer have the ability to send those replies in response to your outbound text messages. So hopefully that's a little bit helpful. All right. So moving forward, we have here a comparison chart. I don't want to go into all of the details of all of the breakdown, but it is good to think about what is the side-by-side comparison for short code versus toll-free, right? When we think about, like, obviously both offer one-way and two-way messaging. Two-way messaging meaning, right, one way is broadcast out. So some organizations, if you're thinking about using mobile and thinking about using SMS and text messaging, I would encourage you to think about not just how you can broadcast out messages, but what sorts of response you might want for people to send back. How do you want those people to be able to engage with you and your organization? So really thinking about SMS and mobile engagement in a two-way conversational kind of a concept, I think that's very helpful. When we talk about throughput, again, how quickly can you send a larger volume of messages in a short amount of time? Toll-free SMS, as we're going to look at, is a longer number of digits. Toll-free can be branded. So when we think about vanity shortcodes, we also have a concept of vanity toll-free, where your organization can control and customize the digits that are included in your toll-free number that you're using for text messaging. And we have some cost comparison, et cetera. So again, if you are interested in getting access to this deck, then we can absolutely help to share that out after the training. So I'll be following up with Action Network, and that can be shared out to everyone who's in the training today. Moving into some illustrations of what does a toll-free number look like for text messaging, right? Here's a great example. This was from a mayoral campaign that was not too long ago here in New York City. The message that is coming to an end user is going to be coming from a number that's formatted according to the typical toll-free number format that you can see here. Interesting to think about toll-free numbers. Unlike short codes, toll-free numbers do have the capability to be enabled both for voice and for text messaging, right? So if you have an organization where, even if you're a small grassroots organization, you want to set up a virtual number, you can actually stand up a toll-free number through Twilio, and you can enable that toll-free number for text messaging and also for voice calling for people to call into that number and get connected to your headquarters. So that's kind of an interesting tidbit about toll-free. Here, one of my personal favorite examples of a use case for toll-free text messaging. You can text into this different toll-free number, enter your zip code, and you can find out which native group was, the land that you're on, right? This is a kind of an interesting land recognition, historical, educational opportunity through text messaging as well. We have a concept as well called verified toll-free. If you procure a toll-free number, I work as well with Action Network partners to set up new toll-free numbers for different organizations that are wanting to launch text messaging programs. You verify a toll-free number by submitting details about your organization name, your use case. Again, you present details on how you're collecting proof of opt-in. We handle the verification process on Twilio's side. And then once you do get your toll-free number verified and all of those use case examples, a sample of the type of the text message you expect to send, we'll get back, and then we can give you an option to increase the throughput on a given toll-free number. So again, if you do need something higher for your throughput for toll-free, you may increase to 25 message segments per second, 50 message segments per second, et cetera. If you verify your toll-free number, what are the benefits, right? Because it takes a little bit of extra time. How long does it take for the verification process? It can take about 5 to 7 business days, which is much faster, as we had heard earlier. If you're going through the process of applying for and going through vetting for a dedicated short code, that can take 8 to 12 weeks or even longer. if you want to get a toll-free number for text messaging and you want to launch your program quickly, 5 to 7 business days, it's much friendlier. So that can be a great way to kind of leap in and get up and running with your text messaging outreach with not a lot of time that's going to be consumed there. So again, no additional cost to go through verification. That's going to improve your SMS deliverability. Avoid snowshoeing, right? So if you're curious, you can Google snowshoeing, but snowshoeing is a deliberate attempt to evade carrier guidelines. So you want to basically tell carriers upfront through the verification process for toll-free, what is your use case, what types of messages you're going to be sending. You have an agreed upon throughput. That's going to be how quickly you can send through the volume of messages that you need. And then you operate according to the guidelines and the requirements of carriers. Again, we're looking mainly at Verizon, AT&T, and T-Mobile. High throughput toll-free, we talked about increasing throughput. So I think we don't need to spend too much on this. I do want to call out that we have toll-free text messaging can be functional in Canada as well, just in case that any of you have branches or that you are connected with other organizations that are operating in Canada. So this is not only limited to the United States. So, all right, I'll pause for any additional questions. All right, perfect. Looks like we're good to go. Compliance 101, can I text everyone on the planet? Hopefully this answer is clear, but just to make this extra clear. Your organization must have proof that users have explicitly opted in to receive messages from your organization, right? So we talked earlier about the importance of including sender identification in your outbound texts. Really, you absolutely need to have opt-in. That is a change that's become more and more apparent in the ecosystem. I think a number of years ago, this question, you might get different answers from different places. Right now, the direction that we and Twilio, we have our own carrier relations team. So I have colleagues that work every single day actively talking to representatives from the major carriers, specifically in the United States. Carriers are really expecting proof of opt-in, period of end, just end of story. So that's again why Action Network's tool set is built with compliance in mind. So I can't stress this enough. Messaging to opted-in users is going to boost your engagement rates. It's going to help your fundraising. It's going to help you recruit more volunteers. It's going to help to grow the engagement of your supporters and your members in a lot of the ways that we've already described. So is it okay for me to purchase a list of cell phone numbers and start texting those users right away? Oh, sorry about that. Purchasing lists of cell phone numbers. I recognize that this is extremely common across especially the political landscape. That's absolutely frowned upon. And it is actually called out in Twilio's messaging policy. If you need help on figuring out like, okay, so I'm not supposed to purchase a list of cell phone numbers, I need to figure out how to build a list, right? You can definitely chat with your friends, and like Action Network has years of expertise in this area. At Mobile Commons, I used to advise organizations on the same question. How can I build my list of opted-in people? I want to make sure that I'm getting opt-in, but I need some advice and some strategies about how I can capture opt-ins. Short answer to that question is advertise the opportunity to opt in everywhere that you're already engaging with people, including Facebook, Twitter, your email supporter outreach list. If you're organizing virtual events, you can announce a call to action during your Zoom events. There are lots of different ways where you think about what are all those channels that you're already using to communicate with your members and your supporters and your prospective supporters, and just incorporate that call to action in those existing communication channels. So that's a little bit about how you can think about building a list if you don't already have that list of opted-in users. Right, and then a lot of this is, commonly I'll hear I'm with a nonprofit organization, one of our partner organizations is offering to share their list. Is that okay? Generally, no, that's not okay, because again, when you think about people opt in to receive messages from Greenpeace, and then all of a sudden one day they get messages from World Wildlife Fund. but they don't remember opting in to receive messages from World Wildlife Fund because these are two completely different organizations, right? So the idea being that you want people to have a very clear understanding who's sending the message, why is that end user receiving that specific message? It's because, oh yeah, I remember. This is, and then also a really great way to think about this is your frequency of how often you're reaching out to people to engage through SMS. You do want to have a regular cadence. Problems can come up if you don't send a text out to your list of opted-in users for 6 months. Let's say they have radio silence. People can forget that they opted into a particular program. So generally you want to think about what the cadence is that's going to make sense for your organization and for your communication and outreach. But you want to reach out to people, minimum, let's say a couple times a month. That's with a little bit of flexibility, but you don't want to wait 3 or 4 or 5 months before you reach out to folks again. They're going to forget that they opted into your program. They're going to be surprised and confused about why they're receiving a message. And you don't want people to opt out if you can help it, right? You want to keep them engaged. You also don't want consumers or those end users to file a spam complaint with their carrier about a message that you sent, right? So if you're doing things correctly, and if you're thinking about this in the strategic kind of overall framework that I've presented, people will always say, oh yeah, I'm so glad to hear from my friends at AFSCME again, or I'm so excited to hear from my friends at Do Something again. I'm really looking forward to learning more about volunteer opportunities with dosomething.org. They expect to receive these messages and they're eager to respond and take action. All right, so we talked about all Twilio SMS traffic is referred to as A2P or application to person, so it requires proof of opt-in. Twilio's messaging policy, that's available online. I've included the link, twilio.com legal messaging policy. Definitely encourage folks to review that if you're interested. And that does match up and align very well with carrier guidelines and expectations. Compliance and deliverability. Do a little bit of a time check. Hopefully, Seth, are we still okay on time?
Yes, we're good. You got about 10 minutes.
Okay, perfect. So on this, some of this is review, right? What should you feature on an opt-in, sender ID, compliant opt-out language, help prompt? Users should always have that option to text back help. And then that way they could get additional details such as how to contact your organization if they have further questions. You can include your organization's info at email address, or you can include your organization's centralized phone number. In case people who are engaging with you through text messaging, they might want to pick up the phone and call and speak to a real person who's at your organization, or they might want to send an email and get an email response. So giving people that different way to reach out and connect. We talked about a lot of this, right? So this slide is pretty much review. Avoid bit.ly and owly links. Don't use free public link shorteners. That's very heavily scrutinized by carriers. Personalization is awesome. With Action Network, we have a lot of great tooling to avoid sending text messages to landlines or deactivated phone numbers. So you want to always make sure you're sending to valid deliverable phone numbers. On here, the last thing, we can use our last little bit of time. Let's look at the text message examples on the right-hand side or my right-hand side. Hey, it's Eric. We've reached over 260,000 veteran and active duty voters in Georgia, et cetera. Can anyone tell me, and by dropping into chat, what's the problem with this text message that we're looking at right here? What should they have not included in this text message? And just drop into the chat if you can find it. Bit.ly link, correct. Do not use Bit.ly links. Let's see if we can look at, and also we see on the other one, right? We have another Bit.ly. Don't use Bit.ly. Right, and immigrants' rights are human rights. Tune in for a special Moral Monday. This, I will just give you all the answer in case correct, because these are examples of what should you not do. Here, it's not very clear what is the sender identification. So we know what issue this is talking about, right? But we're not quite sure who is the organization that's sending this. So just be very clear with, right, who is your organization, identify that up front. make it easy for people to connect, reply stop to opt out, reply help for further info. And I think that brings us, we have some, but we're running a little short on time. So, and then that's it. So we'll stop because we're not covering A2P 10DLC today. But Seth, I'll pass it back over to you and happy to field any final questions.
Cool. Yes, way to fill the time. We had a lot of information to cover, but you did it. Like I said, I always learn something new. So thank you for that. If folks do have questions in a couple of minutes remaining, you can drop them in the chat. I am going to share a couple of links here for folks if they're interested in learning more about acquiring the mobile messaging tool here at Action Network. Really straightforward. On our partnerships page, it'll pop you right into the mobile area where you can get a quote. And also you can look at the calculator in order to kind of estimate what your cost would be. If you are currently an Action Network partner that has access to the email tool, then you can actually enable mobile messaging. That's something that you can reach out to us at partnerships in order to enable, but the first place that you're going to want to go is to that mobile link that I just put into the chat. And then also, excuse me, we have a guide that we created with some good best practices related to a lot of what we talked about today. When you're looking to get your mobile program set up, you can get a copy of that sent right to your email today. If you are currently in the Action Network universe by texting guide to our number here at 612-688-1927. So you can go ahead and give that a try. Check out our mobile messaging guide. But I'm fielding the chat. How are we getting this recording? Just like all of our other cool trainings that we do offer. If you RSVP'd, you'll get a link to the recording once we have it up to our YouTube channel. So you will get that in your email that you use to sign up for today's training. Cool. Thanks so much again, Jeri, for doing this training and all the work you're doing at Twilio. So if there are no other questions, you can, oh, cool. Yeah, I'm going to share my colleague's email too for folks that are still hanging out. You can reach out to Evan directly, Evan Latt, who heads up partnerships for mobile messaging. So it's evan@actionnetwork.org. So that's in the chat. So you can check out the partnerships page there, but you also can reach out to Evan directly with any questions you have about enabling the mobile messaging tool with Action Network.
I'll call out actually just for those folks who are still on. I noticed by going through the chat, we had a really great question. I think it was coming from Rosalind. If you have email opt-ins before setting up mobile messaging, do users have to opt in again to receive mobile messaging or text messages from your organization? The answer to this is that you should always be on the safe side. So I would say yes. And a great way, if you already have an opted-in list for email addresses, you can actually reach out to people via email and give them a clickable option within an email to redirect them to your web opt-in for SMS, right? And give them that very seamless opportunity to opt in very clearly to your text messaging program. They should have an understanding of the types of messages that they're signing up to receive, donation texts, volunteer opportunities, et cetera. And then that way you cover all your bases. All right.
Great.
Thanks so much for having me. It's been great.
Thank you. Thanks, everyone. We're going to go ahead and close up for today, and you'll get the recording. Thanks. Thanks, Jeri.
Take care, all. Bye-bye.